Now we welcome in Trevor Matich for yet another Matich Monday. College football has two teams remaining. Trevor, we'll get to that in just a moment. But first and foremost, how was your weekend? How are you doing?
Doing good. I'm looking forward to nights of more than 3 hours sleep, and that'll come in February probably, and that'll be great. Meantime, I'm loving this 12-team playoff. I'm loving the BYU football season. I mean, this season has come to a place where it is right now in a way that's been so exciting to watch, and so I'll sleep later.
It's been fun, and we got the national championship game coming up Monday. We want to hear your thoughts on that so much. We're waiting until Tuesday to bring you on next week. So we've got to ask you today, who do you have winning the Natty next Monday night, Ohio State or Notre Dame?
I think Ohio State wins. I think they win by a fairly comfortable margin. I think a big reason is injuries on the offensive line for Notre Dame. Their starting left tackle is now officially out. Their starting right guard had to leave the playoff game last week, and he'll probably play, but he'll be banged up. And that's really tough when you're facing this defensive front that's got first-round draft choices up and down the line that Ohio State's going to bring. And I think that Riley Leonard, the quarterback for Notre Dame, did something I didn't think he'd be able to do in the playoff game against Penn State, and that is throw the ball deep reliably, repeatedly again to covered receivers. He did a great job, and really all year long, that's been absent from their offense largely. And if he's able to do that again against Ohio State, they'll have a chance to keep this thing close because their defense is terrific. But I worry that Leonard might not be able to duplicate that against this Buckeyes defense. So I'll take the Buckeyes.
Trevor, many BYU fans and college football fans in general, for that matter, are looking at the 12-team playoff and thinking, okay, it was great, but we need to make all these changes, and I've heard a lot of them. What do you think needs to be implemented by the College Football Playoff Committee and the powers that be as they look to make it even better? What needs to change?
I think the first thing, and by the way, it looks like they're not going to change anything in year two, which is perfectly fine. You know, just let it settle in. Let's get some history before they start to make big changes. But one thing that people are talking about is to not have the top four highest ranked conference champions get a first round bye automatically. Let the first five conference champions, highest ranked, make the 12-team field, certainly, but don't give automatic byes to them. Once those top five conference champions are in the 12-team field, now seed 1 through 12 based on how the committee has those teams ranked, not with no more consideration given to conference champions. You can also give conference champions an extra boost, because it's important to maintain the value of conference championships, by saying that if a conference champion is not in the top four and doesn't get a first round bye, they should be one of the teams that gets a home game in that first round of playoffs. So that would validate conference champions very well. And so those are things I think that would help. Another thing that I think is important is to refigure the way the committee values losers of conference championship games. There's a lot of talk that the losers should not be penalized in favor of a team that did not make a conference championship game and therefore weren't exposed to that loss. But those losers of conference championship games should also not be favored. In other words, SMU made the playoff in part because the committee respected the way they came back in a close loss to Clemson in the ACC championship game. Well, I think if you're not going to give teams, if you're not going to take away from them because they lost, you shouldn't give them extra credit because they lost in a good way. I think that the loser of a conference championship game should not count in the committee's final evaluation. So if you win, then great. That counts towards where you're ranked in the final rankings. If you lose the conference championship game, it's as if you never played it. That way you don't have to figure out the balance between, we don't want to punish them, but we don't want to reward them for losing that game.
Ultimately, there's so much money to be made with these conference championship games. I don't necessarily see them going away, but I wouldn't mind it. Just expand to 16, and then this is a moot point, right? We'll see what they do the next couple of years, but it's been really fun to have this playoff. NFL playoffs going on as well. It's great. For BYU football, a lot coming back on the offensive side of the ball, led by Chase Roberts, which is awesome. How does BYU maintain or build off the success from last year? Because if they went 10-2 again next year, sign me up, Trev.
Yeah, I think coming back is massive. It's not just the talent and the size, it's the chemistry with Jake Retzlaff. And BYU, I thought last year had one of the best wide receiving groups in the Big 12. And a lot of their success, especially with the running backs being injured at times during the season, had to do with those guys making fantastic catches of passes that Jake was able to thread through tight windows. And to have Chase Roberts back is massive. Now we'll see what happens with Darius Lassiter. As of right now, I'm not sure what would happen with him, whether he comes back, whether he does not. But having Chase Roberts back is a huge benefit for BYU heading into next season.
Trevor, when you look at BYU and the 7-2 mark they picked up in year 2 of Big 12 play, and going with everything you're talking about and we've been discussing with everything BYU brings back, what are your expectations for the Cougars going into their 3rd year of Big 12 play and where they might end up in that preseason coaches conference poll?
I think they'll end up in the top 2, probably in that poll. And my expectations is that they will finish in the top 2 or 3.
Hey.
I think the guys they have coming back are terrific. You know, you start with the quarterback, but now you've got receivers. You've got probably, well, maybe the best linebacking group in the Big 12 next year. The offensive line seems to be restocked. They've got some really good pieces on the defensive line, which is where they had the most attrition at the end of the season in terms of who left. And so, you know, LJ Martin is back at running back. I mean, this is going to be a talented team. And what they've got going for them is that they no longer are believing that they can do it. They've seen that they can do it. They finished the season 11-2 with a win over a Colorado team that played Shedeur Sanders at quarterback, who will be one of the top 2 quarterbacks taken into the draft, and Travis Hunter, the Heisman Trophy winner. And so Colorado came to play, they came to win, and BYU largely dominated that game. And so I think this BYU team, with what they've got coming back, should be considered one of the top teams in the Big 12. But this is going to be a deep Big 12. There are other teams as well that have a lot of talent coming back. I mean, Arizona State, with their quarterback, Sam Leavitt, he was the Big 12 Offensive Freshman of the Year. He didn't really know what he was doing last year, this past season, and he still was fantastic. And he's got Jordan Tyson coming back, who is the Offensive Newcomer of the Year. That's his best receiver, who missed the playoff game against Texas. And had he played, they might have beaten Texas. I mean, that game went to overtime as it was. So the defense of Arizona State, I think, will be really stout again, even though they lose Cam Scatterby. That's a team you got to think about. You know, Kansas State with Avery Johnson coming back at quarterback, Iowa State with Rocco Becht coming back at quarterback. I mean, you've got really good teams in there. And then there's wild cards out there. I mean, Texas Tech has the number 2 transfer recruiting ranking this year going into 2025 in the nation. And so you've got teams. Baylor won their last 6 games in a row in the regular season. So BYU, I expect to be considered by the preseason voters to be one of the top 2 or 3 teams in the conference. But I think for BYU fans, they need to understand that this is going to be an incredibly competitive and deep conference, and BYU will have to, you know, play at their best in order to be able to duplicate what they did last year.
We complained about the schedule at the beginning of the year. In the end, BYU played 6 of the bottom 7 in the league. It shook out that it was just a touch easier. BYU took care of business, which was great. If BYU is ranked highly in the preseason poll, say in the top 16, Trevor, and they can recreate 10-2 in the regular season, does that mean they'll be more of an at-large playoff considered team? Because this year it felt like they were fighting to get up in the rankings, then dropped late.
Yeah, I think the way it works, it'll be very similar to the way it was in 2024, because the committee and the AP poll are 2 different things. The committee's not supposed to look at the AP poll. They're supposed to have fresh rankings every week that they do their rankings, which starts later in the season, and not have consideration over what happened last year or what the AP says. But they're also human. And I think they have a lot of respect for BYU. BYU rose up to a very high ranking by the committee, but then they were penalized when they lost. But look at who they lost to. They lost to Kansas, that had 3 wins at the time. They beat BYU later in the season, you know, and then they lost to Arizona State, which went on to the playoff, right? And so these are the that Kansas loss really hurt them. And the committee, I think, said, okay, well, you've had some good wins here, SMU especially, Kansas State, great win. But a couple of those wins were against Utah and an Oklahoma State team that didn't win a single conference game, and you had to come back in the last minute to beat those two teams. So the committee's trying to figure out ways to differentiate. I think what will help BYU next year is that the human nature of the committee is such that they've seen BYU play this last full season. They know that BYU is a solid program. They saw the bowl game. They know that BYU can play at a very, very high level. I think that'll give them more of a benefit of the doubt after a loss than they got in 2024.
Trevor Matich of ESPN is back for another Matich Monday. Trevor, I fully anticipate that when the final AP poll comes out after the national championship game, BYU will end up somewhere around number 12 or number 13 in those final rankings. So looking ahead to the preseason top 25, assuming you are casting a vote there, where would you put BYU going into the preseason AP top 25, not just the Big 12?
Yeah, I put them in the vicinity of 12 or so, 10. When you look at the teams around them that they'll be competing with for that preseason poll, and the preseason poll is speculation. And by the way, a lot of people hate preseason polls because no games have been played. I love preseason polls because it gives us a starting point and it gives us a place we can argue over. And that's
yes.
part of the fun of college football.
Yes.
But, you know, when you look at some of the teams around them that have that are breaking in new quarterbacks in 2025, you're looking at teams like Ole Miss, Indiana, you know, teams like that. Miami's going to have Carson Beck coming in, but Beck is coming off of an elbow injury. We'll see how he's able to perform, you know, and then Alabama's losing their starting quarterback, probably. Jalen Milroe, I think, is going off to the draft. But then there are other teams that'll be moving up. I mean, LSU will be stacked, and Garrett Nussmeier is coming back for them. I mean, so it's going to be an interesting little battle in the preseason AP poll, but I think it would be fair for the AP pollsters to put BYU in the vicinity of 12, give or take 2. And then BYU has to prove that they're worthy of that. And the thing is, the thing they've got to avoid is the tendency to believe that they've arrived. And it's not that they won't work as hard, but when there's urgency, you are pushed harder, whether it's as an individual with competition in practice or whether it's coming off of a season from 2023 where you lost your last, 5 in a row, and you want to prove people that you belong. There's an urgency. Look at Ohio State in this year's playoff. They lost to Michigan in the last game of the regular season at home, and they came out ferociously and absolutely dominated the first 2 playoff games that they play. And BYU's got to stay in that position where they're hungry and they feel like they have something to prove, and not that, hey, we tied for the lead with a 7-2 record in the Big 12 last year. We're pretty good. And as long as they maintain that hunger and that urgency, then they'll be in good shape compared to the teams that will be ranked around them.
Absolutely. We've talked about that too. How will BYU handle success when people believe in you and think highly of you? Then what do? I want to ask you about Jake Retzlaff because he had good numbers. I certainly think he can play better. 20 touchdowns, 12 picks. 58% completion percentage, nearly 3,000 yards passing. That's a good season. Where is the ceiling and where can he go up from here?
I think he's got a lot of upside from here. He gets a lot of criticism because of the turnovers. But you have to take the good with the bad with a guy of the style of Jake Retzlaff. He's got kind of an unconventional release, but the ball tends to go where he wants it to go. He's very much a creative quarterback. And sometimes it doesn't go well for you, but other times it goes great. And without Jake Retzlaff and exactly who he was in the 2024 season, BYU would not have been in position to win 11 games. Retzlaff is a huge factor in their success. But heading into next year, now what he can do better is to be more process-oriented, more oriented towards the progressions, towards reading defenses and getting the ball 1, 2, 3, that's where I'm going, of matching his feet with his eyes and make sure that his throwing platform is more consistent. Things like that you'll get in the second year as a full-time starter that maybe you didn't have as much as a first-time starter. Take a look at Patrick Mahomes. At Texas Tech, he was seen as a guy that would throw the ball all over the place, but he didn't stay within the system all that much. when he got to Andy Reid and the Kansas City Chiefs, he had the professional humility to submit to Andy Reid's coaching and to base his game not on what made him so successful at Texas Tech, which was playground football, but base his success on the system, on the progressions, and then when things broke down, then be creative. And so I think that Jake Retzlaff can have that same kind of progression in college, where, you know, he was a lot of creativity this year, without which they would not have won 11 games. But he can be even better if he learns to create less at the beginning of plays and then becomes creative when things break down.
Trevor, a mere 229 days until Jake Retzlaff makes his next start for BYU.
229.
Right around the corner, my friend. Hey, we appreciate the time as always. Looking forward to the national championship and talking to you again next week.
Thanks, guys.
Trevor Matich of ESPN, consistently bringing it on this show.